Hey, welcome back to episode 2. And this is getting up late because I wound up having other stuff to do in the last 2 days and I'm really behind. So I'm probably going to be uploading about 5 videos today and 2 tomorrow. So I'm going to be uploading a lot. And so in this episode, they believe the carvings are clues and markers on the rocks and stuff. Again, and when they did the background and talk about it, they said that waterfalls were power protection. They believe that a lot of the Japanese treasures are buried at waterfalls, and the priests hid them during wartime. Well, this probably is true anywhere in the world. If you put it behind a waterfall, several things happen. One, waterfalls do not change unless, like Niagara Falls, where it's getting like 3 feet in every year because it's pushing down on the top of the rock, so it's kind of breaking down the cliff because so much pressure right here, it's breaking. So when it comes down, then the bottom part breaks and it just keeps going back. So that's probably is true. Well, they told John that the big void is 300 feet down in diorite, which is a very hard stone. And so they can't dig down because it's too hard. So they said try to dig down underneath it. And so they can't drain the waterfall or drain down because they're worried because the waterfall supplies the local town with water. And so it's probably impossible to do it right now unless they can try to divert the water to another area. And then they go to the mysterious tunnel. The mysterious tunnel. And it's about a mine. It's nothing else. And they don't think this mine is picked clean. I believe this mine is picked clean, but if they move over a little bit more, there's other areas they can mine. The satellite showed a whole strip of metal, so I believe that they can actually do it. So they try to bring an excavator, but it's raining. Between June to September in the Philippines, going into October, it is heavy rain. We're talking probably around a foot a day it can rain. I mean, it comes down in buckets. I'm not gonna lie. So they have to put up support beams just so all the rain doesn't make the tunnel collapse. Well, if you look at a lot of the Yamashita treasure hunting stories, you'll notice that there's a lot of cave-ins, and a lot of cave-ins are people not being what we would say safe. Because you really have to be safe when you go into these caves and not move anything. Once you start moving stuff, the caves can cave in and can kill people. A lot of people have died because of cave-ins because they see a box, they see a beam, they think there's something behind the beam, they pull it, and then what happens is the tunnel collapses. So they're putting support beams up for safety reasons. They're listening to 100 hours of the Robert Curtis tapes. After Robert Curtis left in 1978, he started recording everything. And after talking, like my last video, he was told to go to the press. So he started recording all his exploits, everything that happened to him in the Philippines, why he was worried, and started naming names. And he went to the Philippines in 1974 to help Ferdinand Marcos smelt gold. And they said he spent 30 years in the Philippines. No, he did not spend 30 years in the Philippines. He spent approximately 4 years with Ferdinand Marcos. He left the Philippines because he was threatened with death. I mean, General Ver pretty much put a gun to his head and threatened to kill him. So he left in 1978. He returned about 1988, I believe, 86, 88, between 87 and 88. He returned. He worked with the Nippon Star. He worked with a little bit with McDougal. I mean, he talked to McDougal, then he told him where to go. But that's pretty much about it. He tried to work with the Philippine government. There was a cave-in. I guess he left and he came back, and there was a cave-in at Fort Santiago. So he actually came back like 2 or 3 times after Marcos left office. And the last time he came back, he was at the shrine that they went to this time. And he went with Ben Valmorris. And I'm surprised they haven't talked about Ben Valmorris now. Because right now, Ben Valmorris was talking about that shrine. Robert Curtis in his book said they went to that shrine to look for gold and they were kicked off at gunpoint by the landowner, and they had to sue the landowner to continue to dig. And so he testified in 1991 and said there was hundreds of thousands of tons of gold in the Philippines. I'm going to get that to you tomorrow or Sunday. And 1986, there was the revolution, and he had the maps from 1978 to 1986, and he came back to the Philippines in 1987. That's when it was. I was at Fort Santiago in 1989. They go to the waterfall, so they think there's probably another way in, because once we watched the Curtis tapes, he talked about go to another area. If there was a tunnel, a lot of times there were escape tunnels. A lot of times the tunnels spider webbed out, but they also had exits in case there was a crash, what do you want to call it, a cave-in, so that miners could get out. The Japanese also had it in case they were invaded by one side of the tunnel, or like the U.S. in many places had to use flamethrowers inside the tunnels to root them out. They could actually go back and they could go up. Another reason is there was air tunnels. They needed air to breathe because the air gets stagnant if it's not recycled. So they decided that they're going to search around the area for another tunnel. So they talked to Rick, and Rick said Colonel Curioso thought it was under the waterfall. So they said, well, this void is under the waterfall. So they're going to look for the opening that's out. Pretty much 1.5 square mile area that they need to look for the gold. So they bring in Craig Gottlieb. Now, if you don't know, Craig Gottlieb is somewhat of a regular on Pawn Stars. He would come, and he's a military expert on Pawn Stars, and he talks about it. And he says it's a pilot's survival knife, and it's called a mini K-Bot. And it's an extraction tool because it had a saw part on it, a sawtooth on the edge to cut the branches and cuts the harness on it so they can help them escape the airplane. And he said 3 companies made it, and it was called Camillus was the company, and they made this from 1961 to 1981. And so, I mean, somebody's been in that tunnel a long time ago. If you remember last year, there were Korean coins in it from the 70s. So I'm sure that somebody from the 70s, it had to be somebody that was in that tunnel who was probably a U.S. serviceman or connected to the U.S. military. And they were like, maybe that knife was used to pry open gold, and they were running out for their life because they had to, and they dropped the knife. Well, anything's possible. But I would have dropped the knife right there where I found the boxes and ran out. But I would see the boxes, and I probably wouldn't open them up until I got out. I'd try to lift them up, see if I could lift them up, then get them out. So he says in the 40, 50 years, he said that knife was just bent a little. So they went to the Onishi tunnels. And this is where I told you that Robert Curtis and Ben Valmorris and Giga went to this area to search for gold on this property owners, and it was one of the areas that Ben Valmorris says probably had gold. And they talked to a Filipino historian. So they went in and they saw the support beams up on the roof of it, and they call it angled wood. And they think it's the same way the wood was placed inside this tunnel, so they think maybe the Japanese soldiers lived in there, or it was gold. They go back to them searching the area, and they find some metal while searching. Usually things go deep as the rain. So if you drop something, and anywhere in the world, if it's rain, somehow it goes down into the ground. Then you have like mudslides, you have wind blowing dirt, so it gets covered up, and it actually goes deeper. And so they start digging, but they got to be very careful. This is not an unexploded bomb. They haven't done that yet. So John's like, oh, this is a good sign. So he goes, I'm going to bring the excavator over, and we are going to dig down and find out what this is. Now, it could be the Germans actually used metal tubes that went up out of the ground in order for air to come out and to circulate air. So it could be an air vent, or it could be an unexploded bomb, or stuff like that. Bingo, bingo. Goes to the treasure. Still talking to that expert at the National Archives, and he shows him pictures of diamonds, and the Japanese would steal anything. I'm talking, if it wasn't locked down, it was going to be stolen, shipped back. In the Rape of Nanking, it was called Kill All, Take All. 30,000 people were murdered in a few days, and after the Rape of Nanking happened, the bankers came in. The bankers went to the bank, they stole all the gold, they stole all the jewelry, stole anything and everything that could possibly be stolen and shipped it back to Japan. So there was a lot of items. Now, he said about 100 billion. That's probably pushing it. I'd say probably 20 billion probably would be, in today's terms, would probably be right. Rick said 20 years ago when he searched, there was no Breach 6. And the pyramid, a lot of Japanese are writing about the pyramids. And there was a pyramid on the map. So he really believes that it's close to that. So I believe in that right now. They're using the book Gold of the Sun by Robert Curtis, Rick's testimony, and Sterling Seagrave's books. And I think they're using these 4 books and the testimony of Rick in order to say that this is the area. So he said Breach 6 is too dangerous to dig right now, so they're going to use a drone to figure out where to dig. So they want to find out what areas are safer to dig. So they fly a drone with a magnetometer around it, and they found out a safer place to dig. They showed Rick the results, and he thinks there's a tunnel and waits to dig near it, wants to dig near it. So they want to dig close to Breach 6. So they bring the excavator to it. Now, this is one thing I'm trying to say. The excavator gets stuck in the mud. It's rainy season. If it's rainy season and you got a foot of mud and you're having problems with an excavator, can you imagine trying to have a pole cart with a water buffalo? It's going to be very difficult. When the Allies were fighting, I believe on Aklan, it could have been Panay, they said that the mud on the ground was a foot deep. It was very hard to fight. It rained every day. It was very hard to fight, and they were stuck in a foot of mud. That was the biggest obstacle they had to fight. When they attacked Baguio, they came up the coast, and they attacked the same place the Japanese attacked in 1941. When they came up, there was a typhoon, which caused them many problems. So they had all these boats just being thrown around. So it is very, very treacherous. I cannot see the Japanese trying to dig a tunnel when it's pouring out like this. I'm talking a foot a day, 2 feet a day. It can be very treacherous with cave-ins, mudslides, you name it. I mean, Japanese were terrible people, but I don't think they were that dumb to be fighting against the elements. It was muddy, unstable, and they just stopped digging because it was just too dangerous. They tried to bring up another excavator. They got 2 of them here. And so they have to bring a road to where they want to dig for, where they believe that where the metal is. So, and again, it's soft ground and they're sinking into the ground. They're having a lot of trouble. They can't move. So they're going to build a steel shaft in front of the tunnel in order to stop a mudslide, to make it safer. And while they're digging, they find these concrete aggregates. Now, this is one thing I found out. When I was in Saipan, I was digging for a garden, and I found concrete. Basically, sometimes concrete piles are thrown up into heaps. And like I said, stuff kind of sinks over time. I'm not saying this is it. This is what it is. It could be almost anything in there. It could be the Japanese actually had not seashells, but like clams and oysters that they got from the ocean, and they ate them, and they just made a big seashell pile. And over time it sank, or they were making some cement for a barrier for the cave, and that was just leftover concrete, and they put it. It could be anything, but you know what? When you're looking for something, everything is on the table. Until you can find out that it's not useful, it's a piece of evidence. And they believe that it's man-made. Okay, Rob and Michelle, they're on the other excavator. They're trying to rock the fourth and make the excavator get out. And yeah, eventually they do. Rick wants to investigate the concrete that they found. And he hopes that it might be the same mix that they used during World War II. So they're trying to use a jackhammer to break into the concrete. And Rick hopes that it comes to a tunnel. So next week they find nitroglycerin, I believe it is, or some acid. But a lot of times they would use some acid to burn concrete. They would also use mercury to extract gold. When Fidel Ramos became president, one of his policies had to have been to clean up the rivers, because when Marcos was president, a lot of miners refused to sell their gold to the central bank in fear that Marcos would steal it and they would not get paid. So they would actually smelt the gold. They would actually extract the gold from rock by using mercury. When the mercury was worthless anymore, they would just throw it on the ground or throw it in the river. So there was a lot of pollution in the area. The gold then was shipped to Malaysia. And so the miners would ship the gold to Malaysia, and that was the way they did it. And they even did it up until Fidel Ramos was president. And I'm not sure, they still may do it today because they have a fear of the government. But I'll get this into this weekend. The amount of gold now, as opposed when Ferdinand Marcos left office, is probably 4 to 5 times the amount that was in the central bank. Another one is they supposedly find a landmine, but they didn't find the landmine. They just found the shell of it. The Filipinos and other miners are very useful, or what I want to call it, frugal, or they make things out of things that, if they need a bowl, they will find a way to make a bowl. Let me just put it that way. So whatever they have available, they will make a bowl. So they could have used the shell of the mine as a bowl, as a digging tool. I don't believe it was actually, now just from the preview, I don't believe it was actually a bomb to protect the cave. I believe it was a tool, either a tool or a utensil, like a bowl or a plate to eat from, or it was a tool to dig dirt out. You have to use what is available. So I'm believing it's that. They did find some acid, and I believe it was hydrochloric acid, I believe it was. I'm just trying to remember. But if you read the code book, it says use the hydrochloric acid to burn the cement. So they could have been using this acid to burn cement. So that could have been a sign there. Or they could have used the acid to mine the gold. So they're saying there's booby trap. It's either a booby trap or a mining thing. You remember back in the 1960s, 1970s, they did not have the safety standards as they did today. And they did not have the ways to get the gold out of the ground like they do today. So, all right, that's going to do it today. And I'm really interested. I mean, I like this season much better than last year. So, because they're doing it scientifically. You have to do it. You say, this is what we know. This is what we're going to look at. And if this doesn't work, we're going to move on to the next one. And you have to eliminate all possibilities before you can say there's no gold, there's nothing there. But right now, my gut feeling is it's a mine that's been mined out. All right, that's going to do it now. I'll be back tomorrow, and then I'll be back on Tuesday night. Thank you.